Good evening. Tonight we will be discussing the nature of magic and reality. Just in brief, there will be several videos on this particular topic. Magic may not be an exact science, and in fact it is definitely not an exact science, but it still appears to follow certain rules and principles. Some of these rules are akin to physical laws, some of them are not. No one, no matter how adept or how much experience they have, fully understands magic and its uses. However, if you can understand a few basic principles, then you are well on your way to at least having a basic grasp of magic. Believing in something that cannot be readily seen is something humans have been doing for time immemorial. Whether it is believing in a god, some type of god or goddess, or whether it is just believing in the air we breathe. We are quite adept at believing in what we cannot see. So a belief in magic does come naturally to a lot of people. Most people at least acknowledge that there's more to the universe than meets the eye. There's far more to the universe than we understand. And there's probably far more to the universe than we will ever understand, even though our understanding does grow day by day. So the nature of magic is such that it is not fully understood. No one is pretending otherwise. But it does appear to behave according to some very basic rules. Some of these very basic laws of magic are immutable, and some of them you can be kind of wishy-washy. So let's talk about just a few of them. So the first rule of magic is that the world around us is a mixture of reality and perception. So our world, our worldview, the way we see the world, is, yes, based in reality, but it is also something that we perceive, and everyone's perception is slightly different. So the way I see the world is not necessarily the way you see the world, because we do have different perceptions. We have different lived experiences. So that means that the nature of magic will be different for each person. Another commonly accepted idea when it comes to magic is that if you search for evidence that something is true, and you search hard enough and you search long enough, you will probably find the evidence you're looking for. We're really good at that. It's called confirmation bias. So you don't necessarily always have to avoid confirmation bias, but it's a good thing to be aware of. To be aware of that if you believe something strongly enough, you're probably going to find evidence that it's true. So it's good to have the ability to step back, especially when it comes to magic, which we don't really understand, because then you can at least look at it with a more objective eye and understand where other people are coming from. So though confirmation bias exists, it's good to be aware of it and to learn to step back when necessary. Another thing that is important in magic is to understand that all statements are true in one sense, false in another, and meaningless in a third. So everything, every word that comes out of your mouth, every word that comes out of my mouth, depending on how you look at that and how you interpret it, it could be either the truth, a lie, or absolutely meaningless. So this is true of all things, not just in magic. This is true of pretty much everything we say. Unless it's an immutable scientific fact, a lot of what comes out of our mouths can be interpreted in a variety of ways. And that is the same when it comes to working magic or casting spells. What comes out of your mouth can be interpreted differently depending on who's listening. So when you are working your magic, it is in your best interest to be as specific as possible, because what comes out of your mouth, you might have one intention, but it might not sound like that to someone else. Another important thing in magic is if it works for you, then it is true for you. So often in the magical community, you'll have people who criticize the way you're doing something. But if it's not hurting anyone else and it's not hurting you, then it is a perfectly acceptable way to do something, if it works for you. It may not work for everybody, but if the way you sit down and cast a spell, or the way you sit down and meditate works for you, even if everyone else says that's not a good way to do meditation, works for you, then it is indeed true. Another principle of magic, something that we should be aware of, is that everything is connected. So I am connected to you, you are connected to your neighbor's connected to your dog, etc., etc. The entire universe is connected to each other. We're all connected. So when you do something over here, it has an impact over here. So it's important to be aware that what we're doing may have unintended consequences. So another principle of magic, and this one comes up a lot, is if two things have just one thing in common, just one little thing, that one thing can be used to influence both things. So that one little thing can be used to influence or even control two things. And that's the idea behind, stealing a lock of hair or getting some fingernails in order to work magic upon someone. That means I have this thing that is connected to you, but I have it, so it's connected to me. Therefore, I can use this thing to influence the both of us. I can inflict my will upon it, and therefore inflict my will upon you. That's the general idea there. Another important principle is cause and effect. So the cause and effect of something tend to resemble each other. And that is very true a lot of the time. Not all of the time, but a lot of the time the cause and effect. So the spell you cast generally should resemble the results you're trying to get. Okay? And we'll go into that one in more detail later, not today, but we will go into that one in more detail because it's really important that if you're casting a spell for a certain result, that your spell at least sort of resemble the result you're trying to get. So another one that's important is that if two things were once in contact, they can continue to interact after separation. So that means, again, if I take a lock of your hair, that hair can be used to influence, or you can be used to influence the hair. Because even though you're no longer connected, you once were, therefore you still are. So the connection might be less, but it's still there. It's not severed entirely. And this next one is the last one I'm going to cover for today because I'm just looking at the length of the recording. And then I will start talking about principles of magic next time. But right now, I'm just going to go over this last one. So the last one states, two laws or worldviews may contradict each other and still be true, as no worldview may encompass all reality. So what this one basically says is that two people can have vastly different experiences, which leads them to see the world in vastly different ways, and neither one is wrong, okay? Just because I see something one way and you see something another way doesn't make either of us wrong. It just means we see it differently. And this is very true when it comes to magic, because I might see a problem and address it with a spell. You might see the same problem and address it entirely differently because you don't see the problem or the solution the same way I do. So this one comes up a lot in magical communities when people are discussing how to respond to something. Well, it depends how you see it. And there's not necessarily a right or a wrong way. And just because I have a little bit of time left, looking at the time on the recording, I will just bring up one little thing. Every action is an exchange of energy. Okay, so that energy has to go somewhere. It doesn't just disappear. That's the basis of spellcraft, is everything I do somehow brings energy to me, sends energy away. You're moving energy. So the important thing there is to remember that that energy has to go somewhere. It doesn't disappear. It doesn't just go poof. So it's important to just make sure you kind of have a handle on that and that you understand that what you're doing doesn't suddenly disappear into nowhere. It's not Never Never Land. Everything you do that involves energy has to resolve at some point. Just because you sent energy out into the universe, it's got to go somewhere. Just because the spell is resolved doesn't mean that energy is gone. So you kind of have to think long term. Kind of have to think about steps 2, 3, 4, what might happen as you release that energy into the universe. Anyway, that is about all we have time for today. We are going to come back and talk about some more principles of magic next time, just because I do not want to spend 25 minutes in one video talking about the same thing. So we will come back and talk about it next time. I hope you enjoyed this little video. I know it wasn't much. I didn't really get anywhere, but I am going somewhere with this. So come back next week and we will talk a little bit more about this particular topic. Blessed be.